Hey, everybody. Fascinating chat today as we dive into the world of market research and marketing powered by AI with Glimpse. Adam, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you, Evan?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for joining. Excited for this chat. Maybe start with some introductions. Who is Glimpse and a little bit about yourself and your role?
Yeah, well, I have a little bit of a weird role, I suppose, for a business guy. I started off as an academic, an anthropologist of technology and innovation, did my PhD research in China primarily, taught in some business schools and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the next thing I did is help start a company called Nomadic Learning, which weirdly was acquired last week. I had left a few years ago. And Nomadic tried to transform big organizations through learning. So cohort-based digital learning at scale, small groups of people moving through case study content together. And this all relates because when I was at Nomadic, everyone essentially asked for the same thing. When I was transforming marketing functions for IBM, PepsiCo, AB InBev, lots of big companies, they would
Mm.
always say, we want this thing called customer centricity. And I always laughed because everyone wanted it. No one could quite define it. And it seemed like decade after decade, nobody quite achieved it. And I started thinking, well, why is that? Why is it that marketers and salespeople can't get closer to customers? And meanwhile, my friend Neil, who's the founder of Glimpse, the guy who's really created the technology and has a market research technology background, started saying, I think part of the problem is the tools people are using and the kinds of conversations they're having inside the enterprise. That the
Mm.
qualitative research, the conversations with clients, going out to observe what they're doing in the stores or in their offices, that's where the gold is. That's where the real knowledge is. But there's no way to get at that knowledge quickly and at scale and then induct it into a kind of research flywheel. So we build our knowledge over time and we help everyone in the company get closer to customers and not just a few of the market researchers. And so that's really where my initial interest in Glimpse came. And I can pause for a minute or I can keep telling you more about Glimpse.
Yeah, that sounds intriguing. Great backstory. And so, talk about how Glimpse works in terms of supporting decision making, helping humans with their insights. I mean, how does the platform achieve that?
Yeah, it's one of those weird paradoxes with AI where our idea was, can we use AI to help humans listen more
Mm.
effectively to humans? That is, can we get it what's most human about groups of humans precisely by applying AI in new ways? So rather than this kind of reverse anxiety about losing the humanity of the world by applying AI. And the thought was, well, all of that data that we value the most, open-ended comments, the language people are using, their emotions, that's
Mm.
very difficult to understand at massive scale if you're a human because it takes weeks to code the data, to read through the transcripts, and by the time you've done that, the decision window's gone. You've either won or lost, made the right decision or the wrong decision, and it's way in the rearview mirror. And our thought was, well, let's do a couple things. Number one, let's make surveys not terrible because I think a lot of business people rightly think of surveys as terrible. Why? Because people don't answer them like they're human beings. They answer lots of multiple choice questions using a very old format in a very backward looking way. And they're terrible for discovery because if I'm a respondent in a survey, a consumer say, I can't actually tell you what I think very effectively. I'm just choosing between four preset options for a question. But the trade off was always either you do that or you spend weeks and months sending highly skilled people out to do focus groups and interviews, spend a huge
Mm.
amount of money, and don't get the scale and representativeness that you're looking for. So, Glimpse, first of all, is a way to make surveys better. That's how we started. And we spent a lot of time and money thinking about how to analyze the data. So, categorizing it, finding opportunities inside it, thinking about messaging to deliver to respondents based on the language they're using. And now Glimpse can ingest any form of data. So whether it's a survey that you're running on Glimpse, end to end, where we find you the audience and everything, or a survey you've run on whatever your favorite platform is, Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, Decipher, whatever, and social data and transaction data, and really bridging the gap between behavior and action. that's so sorry, behavior and attitude that's so important. And then the outputs are not only analysis, data analytics, but things like digital twins of whole audience segments that you can engage with in
Wow.
real time, messaging for your new campaign. So, really kind of advanced, cool stuff that goes beyond typical research platform outputs.
Well done. That's exciting. So you
Thank you.
must have lots of anecdotes and stories where glimpses, predictions, have transformed decision making, provided unique insights. Care to share any of those?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, of course, unfortunately, a lot of the best ones are top secret because sometimes brands and agencies aren't excited about us sharing. But I have a few good ones that actually I do have permission to share, and I'll tell you about one of them that I think is neat. One of our longest standing clients is HubSpot, the
Mm.
CRM and marketing automation platform.
Yeah, need to know introductions.
Yeah, need no introductions. Although not, if you spent like your whole career working for IBM or something, you may not have heard of them because you would only have used Salesforce. Anyway,
Right.
um, they are jumping, really headfirst into AI stuff. But they realize that they need to be even smarter about their ideal buyer. So HubSpot started as this marketing automation platform. They kind of knew who they were selling to. But then it's like they have a lot more functionality. They're selling to lots of other people in the organization from other job functions. They have a really famous thought leadership program and strategy. I'm sure you and your listeners get emails from HubSpot constantly, or if you're looking for like SEO best practices, it's always a HubSpot article that rises to the top.
Mm.
And all that's no accident. It's how HubSpot became HubSpot, right? Primarily by leveraging that strategy. But they started realizing we need to know more about the people we're selling to. And yeah, they're B2B business buyers, and they have a certain budget, they have a certain team size, they're looking for certain kind of technology, but wow, they're also human beings. They're people who have interests, hobbies. They're thinking about their career, they have career aspirations, they're worried about certain aspects of their career, maybe. They're thinking every day about technology as a risk, as a potential opportunity. So HubSpot's question to us was, well, can we really bring these people to life in a three-dimensional way, not just as buyers of technology, not just as leaders of like a marketing function or a finance function or whatever, but as real people. And
Mm.
they asked us that question, and it's like, sure, to some degree, that's what market research does. But then they asked us what I think is a crazy question, really, if you're not in this world, and that is, can we bring that persona to life? And can we
Wow.
engage with that person in real time? Which is not to say that we're like kidnapping a bunch of marketing decision makers and putting them in a room and forcing them to answer questions. But can we create a virtual extension of those people such that when the CEO of HubSpot or anyone else in the organization, wakes up in the middle of the night as we do and says, I have this brilliant idea to innovate the platform. I wonder what our ideal buyers would think. She can actually go ahead and do that. So we're in the midst of that project now. And within HubSpot, they call the project Growth Gabby, right? That's the ideal buyer. Like the companies always give personas names. So we're kind of like Frankenstein. We're bringing Growth Gabby to life based on a foundation of really high quality first party data about the stuff Growth Gabby likes, the ways she thinks about technology and innovation, etc. And I have lots of other stories for you, but that one's top of mind because I'm working on it right now.
That's phenomenal. What a great opportunity. Now, how does it work with industry specific insights? I hear voices of my viewers saying, well, this is great, but I'm in a
Yeah,
niche
yeah,
market. And how do you predict trends in industries that are super narrow
yeah.
in terms of leveraging AI and data?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, we're now working with several consultancies or agencies on projects that relate to really core strategic questions for their B2B clients. And
Mm.
one big global agency that we're working with now has as its clients um, a a giant government contractor that everyone will have heard of, and B, a giant investment bank that everyone will have heard of. And if you're a government contractor, especially if you're selling, high tech stuff, say there's 5,000 people in the U.S. whose opinions you care about, they're all highly paid or really senior. They're hard to track down. It's hard to get time with them. It's it's hard to understand how their opinions are changing. If you're an investment bank, especially one selling to institutional investors solutions, same thing. It's like, how do you find, a managing director of an investment bank and ask him or her what they think about your brand on like a weekly basis? It's going to be so expensive that it's going to be cost prohibitive. Is might as well give up. So what we say to them is, don't give up. Continue to talk to those people, but find a way to extend the dollar value of every dollar you're spending on research with them, which is to say, interview 200 of them or 300 of them, as you do now for your brand tracker, but then let's use that data, configure it, and bring to life a kind of digital twin of those people based on the responses they're delivering. And just to take a step back, all of this sounds, I know, probably to a lot of listeners is kind of like too big to be true. Do you test
Mm.
it? How could this possibly be true? Only I know really what my customers are thinking. And those are all really valid objections. And I would say there are kind of two ways to think about building digital twins or AI personas. The first way is you're kind of like diving into the internet, which is to say a set of large language models, or maybe one of
Mm.
them trained essentially on the corpus of the internet, but on publicly available or quasi publicly available stuff. And you have to ask, how often is an investment banker writing about their investment strategy on like Instagram? Not that often, right? So our option, right, the course we take is a little slower and more expensive and more deliberate, but we think of it as enterprise grade. And that looks at all the proprietary data that a company has about its customers. So histories of surveys, maybe social listening stuff, maybe some transaction stuff, some new surveys that we're helping them run in our more kind of agile way, where we're looking at language and emotion and sentiment, the texture of how those people think about and interact with the world. And that's the foundation, that first party data. And then we're building on top of that and drawing on the power of the LLMs to help fill in the picture when we're asking questions that haven't yet been asked. So the answer to your question is, if you want to do things like build digital twins for really rare, expensive, senior B2B audiences, say, it's both more valuable and harder to do, harder to get right. And don't believe people who say that it's easy to do or you can just use ChatGPT to do it. It'll be a disaster because you won't get things that are outputs that are specific, and you won't get outputs that are free of hallucination. And you'll be guided in the wrong direction.
Yeah, well said. Data accuracy and quality are key, as
Yeah,
you know better than I. Let's talk about the user experience. I've been involved over the years in several projects looking at data analysis and predictions, actually with Twitter data.
yeah,
And, these are typically were run by, like data scientists who are
oh
coding
yeah,
in Python and accessing huge fire hoses of data, very, very complicated stuff, not really accessible to non-technical users. How do you see your tool in terms of the
uh,
user experience, and who is the ideal user? Is it someone, like a data scientist, or can non-technical users leverage it as well?
yeah. That's a great question, Evan. And I guess from the beginning, this sounds like a kind of slogany thing to say, but we always wanted the tool to be very democratic. And I do think that
Mm.
that means something in the world of market research. Um, the thought is not to freeze out the data scientists. Of course, we want to add features that help them get the most out of the tool. But the idea is, can someone who's not a data scientist, or even an insights professional, somebody maybe who's a marketer who has a sense of the audience they're trying to reach, a product innovation person who has a sense of what product market fit might look like, a content creator, a thought leadership professional who has a sense of their audience, how do they get better at customer centricity or audience centricity? And we think part of the answer is to make it easier to run a smart survey or study. So we have AI tools that allow you to translate a simple business question like, I'm trying to get more users or listeners for my podcast. Here's the topics that I'm thinking about. Here's the growth segment that I think I might focus on. Maybe there's a new country or a new language I want to translate my podcast to. Is that going to make sense? And then the system will translate that business question into a really strong survey. And you can, in an automated way, recruit the audiences, get a quote for how much it'll cost you, get the data back, and then get enormous amounts of help analyzing the data and outputting better decisions. And so that's one way to use the tool. And then if you think about a really big company, I'd say that big companies now, and most of them recognize this, have a problem. Kind of like if you think about the IT function, 30 years ago, it was like the separate thing. It had its own budget. It made these big waterfall investments in technology that were very difficult to change. It didn't have much regard in the worst cases for use. It was all about just like kind of buying like a better car every 5 years and saying like, here are the keys, go do something with it. And if people didn't drive it, that wasn't great, but it wasn't really their problem. I think that market researchers, and not because of the researchers themselves, there are a lot of brilliant people there, but companies really undervalue what they can deliver. So they often come with like a shopping list of questions, like,
Mm.
tell me about this audience, tell me about this topic. And then 3 weeks later, 3 months later, after spending a huge amount of money outsourcing certain things or not, they get a report back. And the report says, okay, here's a breakdown of this audience. Here's what we should do about this. Here's what we should do about that. And that's very valuable for a lot of questions. But we think the relationship should be more like, hey, I'm a marketer. I have to increase revenue or ROI on this campaign. Let me bring an insights professional into my team. Let's use a really quick agile tool together and really bring the customer to life so that we can contribute our knowledge to a particular problem and then come up with a pretty good output, test it against the market, look at the data together and iterate and make it better and better over time. And so our tool is really intended to be used by those joint teams and help them get closer to customers. And the last thing I'll say is just in terms of UX, probably the coolest thing about the platform now is once the data comes back in, you can do all the stat stuff, of course,
Mm.
crosstab, confidence testing, statistical testing, to whatever confidence level you want, all that stuff. But you can also chat with the data using everyday, ordinary English or French or German or Japanese or any language. You can ask questions like, hey, system, tell me about X segment. Are there any outliers there? Are there interesting opportunities with Y segment? Okay, how about if we look at those studies over time? Are we seeing any changes? Okay, how about if we isolate just for the young women or the older guys or the people of color or whatever it is? And you'll get outputs back that are really useful, and you can have a kind of dialogue with the data that wasn't possible in the past. And that's a dialogue you could have, I could have, anyone could have, even without a stats background or a data scientist background.
Amazing. Can't wait to check it out.
Yeah,
Let's talk about the future. Give us a glimpse, pun intended, of what's ahead for this industry, maybe for your product or
yeah,
roadmap. Where do you see this going in the next year or two, given how fast everything is changing and evolving in the AI space?
yeah, yeah. I have a bunch of them, but let's see. Let's see. Maybe I'll give you three quick ones. Okay, so
Sure.
and all of these have to do with Glimpse, but it's not like, oh, the whole future is Glimpse. I mean, these will be emerging ecosystems with lots of different
Mm.
companies involved. So the first one is that I think that we have to get from a world where sources of data are treated in a kind of discrete, segregated way to a world where we're looking much more holistically at sources of data, especially when it comes to market research and market opportunity. So just to take one really simple example, in a lot of companies, you have like a social listening team and you
Mm.
have a market research team and you have a kind of data analytics team that's looking at transaction information. Those teams, believe it or not, are rarely talking to each other in lots of big companies, or if they are, it's in a kind of cursory way. So all of them are coming up with smart insights that are probably founded, but then all of those insights sort of rise to the level of the person who has to make the decision about the brand, and it's very difficult to understand the relationship between all three of them. So just to take one example, if you look at, and this is based on a public talk, so it's okay. AB InBev, they're selling Natty Ice, natural ice, right? One of the world's
Mm.
worst tasting beers. And it's intended primarily, really, for people playing beer pong, like in frats, right, in sororities. That's actually the market they're going for, and that brand is heavily represented on social media. and it's in a kind of social bubble. Most of the people who consume it are consuming content about it on social media. Compare it to Corona. Very few people are posting on social media about Corona, but it's a far
Mm,
bigger brand and it's just part of people's
mm,
everyday lives, have it on vacation, whatever. So wouldn't it be nice to understand the relationship between social chatter and market opportunity for each of those brands and then real world conversations about them and transaction data? Then you could start getting ahead of market trends and really creating mental availability, physical availability strategy to differentiate from your competition in a way that would be, fairly de-risked. So that's one example. Can we, eliminate the barriers between sources of data? The answer is increasingly going to be yes, partly through platforms like Glimpse, but partly everywhere. And that has something to do with the fact that generative AI is very good at looking at differently structured sources of data at the same time, where you don't actually have to have everything in the exact same spreadsheet to compare it. You can compare in a kind of vectored way across different forms of data. So it's like different sources of data, holistic. That's number one. Number two is how do you extend that across all of the steps of call it the business planning cycle, right?
mm.
So if you're thinking about marketing, everyone, generally is starting with something they might call like a human insight, just something that's fundamentally true about a group of people, the way they consume something, the way they think about the world. Then, your strategists are converting that into a strategy around messaging, campaigns, etc. You're putting the campaigns into market, you're seeing how they perform, you're learning, and then the next year you kind of do it all again, hopefully in a smarter way. But there's a lot of places where the translation doesn't happen properly between stages. You lose complexity, or you lose nuance, or you waste time, or there's too much friction. And there's one that Glimpse is trying to solve right now that's really, I think, cool. It would be cool to solve, which is you have a big market research firm, if you're a Fortune 500 company, do a segmentation for you, right? And they're like, okay, here are the mini van drivers with kids. Here are the people who love sports. Here, whatever the segments are. And those segments are often based on demographic characteristics or behavioral characteristics. But what if you could also build them based on attitudinal stuff? So, to go back to the HubSpot example, what if we could build a segment based on people who thought a particular way about a HubSpot competitor, like Salesforce?
Mm.
And so your segment was really practical and actionable from the very beginning. And then how do you draw a thread from that segmentation all the way through to an activation audience, to somebody that you're buying access to, essentially, whether it's paid media or an event or whatever? And that thread carried all of the nuance of your segmentation all the way to the audience. So you're buying access to an audience who thinks a certain way about your competitor, not just left-handed golfers, or somebody that has a certain kind of demographic, existence, but
Mm.
somebody who already thinks a certain way. So I think that's my other prediction for the future, that with the help of generative AI and platforms like Glimpse, we're going to be able to draw that thread all the way from those beginning stages of planning where you do that big segmentation all the way to activation. So you're not wasting tons of money and time selling stuff to groups of people that actually don't reflect the people you'd like to be selling to. And then the third one, I'll take 2 seconds, which is the organization's going to have to reorganize a bit in terms of collaboration, in terms of process, to bring both of those visions to life. Because it's not going to make sense anymore to have all of these separate teams who aren't talking to each other. It's not going to make sense anymore to segregate data in the same ways. And so you're going to need to have people on much more cross-functional teams working in a much more agile way to course correct based on the data and using much more agile tools. And Glimpse is one of them, but there's going to be a lot more out there that'll be cool.
Incredibly exciting future here. What about you and the team personally? A lot of stuff happening in the big run up to year end. Any travel
Yeah,
or events or meetups you're looking forward
yeah,
to?
yeah. So I've been doing a bunch of conferences. Tomorrow, um, one of the coolest insights industry organizations is called Green Book.
Hmm.
And they have these IIEX conferences. And the big AI one this year, they're doing virtually, which is kind of nice because people from all over can actually attend and listen for free. So tomorrow, I will be speaking with my HubSpot client, who's the leader of their thought leadership and content growth function, Pamela Bump, who's a brilliant person. And we're going to be talking about how to use generative AI to actually drive your thought leadership strategy if you're
Wow.
a company or a journalist or whatever. And that's at 1:50 p.m. But check out the IIEX Green Book AI website. So that's happening tomorrow. And then lots more happening, lots of feature releases. We're still small, so we move
Mhm.
absurdly quickly, and there's going to be all kinds of new functionality, and we're really going to hit next year running, I think.
Fantastic. Well, I learned so much just in this short half hour. Thanks for sharing the vision and the mission, and can't wait to see more. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, thanks. Awesome questions, Evan. Really happy we had the chance to talk.
Likewise, and thanks everyone for listening and watching. Take care.